I don't want your last name anymore. The sentence didn't drop, it detonated. Right there in the middle of the sunroom, surrounded by polished glassware, fresh floral arrangements, and people who thought they knew what power looked like. The room paused. Forks hovered in midair. Conversations died mid-sentence. My son stood up, straight-backed and certain, looking right at me. Then came the second strike. My new dad says you're a loser. He's the man I look up to now. Laughter. Two of his step-cousins at the far table snorted. One of them clapped. I heard someone whisper, "Damn." And my ex-wife? She beamed, tilted her champagne glass in my direction like this was a toast she'd raised. That smug, rehearsed smirk she always wore when she thought she'd won something. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I reached into my folder, pulled out the envelope I'd brought, just in case, and laid it on the table in front of Mason. Then I unscrewed my pen, placed it gently next to the paper, and slid both across the tablecloth. "That's fine," I said. "Sign here, son. No theatrics. No scolding." I didn't ask him to reconsider. I didn't plead or try to guilt him. I just waited. Because I wasn't angry, I was done. He hesitated for a second, maybe two. Then he grabbed the pen and scrawled his name across the bottom like he was autographing a football. It wasn't just a name he crossed out. It was an entire history. One I had built for him, quietly, methodically, over decades. I'd held him in the delivery room. I was the one who stayed when his mom ran off for that retreat-turned affair in '09. I was the one who taught him to ride a bike, who took a second job to keep him in that prep school when the markets crashed. I was the one who came home every night, dead tired, and still sat with him to practice spelling tests and history flashcards. But none of that mattered now. Not to him. Not anymore. And the worst part? I wasn't even surprised. Somewhere between his 13th birthday and this brunch, he stopped being my son and started becoming hers. Her voice echoed in his opinions. Her vanity lived in his ambition. Even his new haircut, the one he'd insisted on last week, was a clone of her new husband's. The tech investor with the stupidly white veneers and the laugh that sounded like a car alarm. The man who called me Jerry every time we crossed paths, even after I corrected him 3 times. "Sorry, Gerald, right?" Like it was a joke. Like I was the joke. Mason's signature sat inked and crooked on the page, still drying. "Thanks, Dad," he said, mocking the word. "I mean, Gerald." I folded the paper, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked it into my jacket pocket. Then I lifted my glass. "To Mason," I said evenly, "may you get everything you've just asked for." Some laughed. Some winced. One of the step-cousins said, "Whoa," under his breath. But it didn't matter. The line had been crossed, not just in ink, but in blood. And the beauty of it? Mason had no idea what he'd just done. None of them did. See, there's a reason I brought a waiver of legacy. Not out of pettiness, but because I knew. I knew the second I heard that Mason was starting to call his stepfather Dad to his friends. I knew when she changed her last name back, 2 weeks after the ink dried on the divorce papers. I knew when Mason stopped replying to my messages, but started tagging the new family in every Instagram post. This wasn't a phase. It was a campaign. And the brunch? That was their little victory parade. But what they didn't know, and would never guess, is that I've spent 40 years building not just a legacy, but a system, a legal framework, a fortress disguised as a garden. All of it tied to one thread, the name. You carry the name, you carry the key. You drop the name, door shuts behind you forever. And now, thanks to that little performance, the door had just slammed shut. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, left the brunch without dessert. By the way, if you're still listening and you're not subscribed, do me a favor and hit that button. Over 90% of you aren't, and honestly, it helps more than you know. Keeps the stories going, keeps the team fired up, and reminds people like me that quiet revenge still has an audience. Back at home, I poured myself a scotch. No chaser, no music, just the silence of a house finally free from echoing footsteps that never quite belonged. I didn't cry, didn't curse. I opened the safe, pulled out the family charter, and turned to clause 17.4. Mason thought he cut me out of his life. He had no idea I'd just cut him out of the future. The house was quiet in that way only expensive insulation and loneliness can provide. No creaks, no settling beams, just the low hum of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the occasional distant bark from a neighbor's dog. I poured a second drink, not out of habit, but for ceremony. Some moments demand ritual. This was one of them. I took the folder from my jacket pocket and laid it flat on the desk. Mason's signature sat there, proud and defiant, almost cocky, slanted left like he couldn't wait to be done with it. I stared at it a long time, not because I was doubting the next step, but because I wanted to remember how easily it had all fallen apart. That signature wasn't symbolic. I had made sure of that when I drafted the waiver with my legal team 3 years earlier. Around the time, I noticed Mason using my name less and calling her new husband the real provider more. I'd watch from the background as my presence became optional, then inconvenient, then erased. But I hadn't reacted, not publicly. Instead, I adjusted the architecture. Clause 17.4 was obscure by design. Buried deep inside the family charter, it was originally drafted by my grandfather during the Korean War. Back then, it was a mechanism for disowning defectors, literal ones. I reworked it with modern language and digital equivalents, folded it back into the trust under a revision labeled Beneficiary Alignment Protocol. I reached for the landline. Not the cell. The landline. Some calls shouldn't live in cloud logs. The first ring barely finished before the click. Gerald? My estate attorney's voice came through, alert but calm. The man's been with me through 2 audits, a federal contract dispute, and one very delicate situation involving a cousin's rehab clause. I want to initiate clause 17.4, I said. Effective immediately. There was a pause. A real one. Not a stutter. Just a pause where you could hear someone flipping a file open in their head. That, he exhaled. Gerald, that disinherits him. Retroactively. It voids all held allocations. Education, healthcare, even ceremonial roles. You know that. Yes, I replied, staring at Mason's looping M. That's what he asked for. He didn't argue. Just said, understood. I'll initiate the sequence. Would you like to notify the advisory board yourself, or should I handle it? You handle it. Quietly. I'll draft a follow-up letter for the family council. Nothing dramatic. Copy that. He hung up. No platitudes. No condolences. Just execution. I turned in my chair and stared at the wall where the original family tree sketch hung, hand-drawn, framed in walnut. It had been there since before Mason was born. His name, like the others, was embroidered on a golden band beneath his branch. I took it off the wall, not to destroy it. I don't destroy history, but some artifacts belong in the archives, not on display. I opened the encrypted folder on my computer and began moving Mason's beneficiary files into the inactive directory. Each click felt like a shovel hitting dirt. College fund, revoked. Healthcare access, suspended. Property succession, terminated. He had walked into that brunch thinking he was scoring points on social media. What he'd actually done was activate a clause so old, the ink on it predates Bluetooth. The beauty of clause 17.4 isn't that it disinherits the person. It's that it rewrites the inheritance map. There is no appeal, no renegotiation. It locks. And once it locks, every branch tied to that name becomes a dead limb in the legal structure. No flow of funds. No residuals. Not even ceremonial invitations. Mason, without knowing, hadn't just cut himself out. He had forfeited everything tied to that bloodline's legal identity. Because that's what I spent decades building. Not a fund. Not a home. A legacy grid. One that doesn't bend to mood swings or apology texts. He was out. And here's the kicker. Legally, I didn't disown him. He disowned himself. With a signature. In public. Witnessed. Voluntary. His friends even recorded it, thinking it would go viral. One of them captioned it, "Lil Bro divorcing his dad at brunch sculled." I saved it to my evidence folder. It would help if this ever became contested. It won't. But I like backups. I closed the laptop. Locked the file drawer. Turned off the light. This wasn't vengeance. It was clarity. A child doesn't owe loyalty to a parent, but he should understand the value of a name before throwing it away. Mason thought he was burning a bridge. He didn't realize it was the only one that led to his future. The cascade didn't start with a phone call or a shouting match. It started with a silent update to a secure server at precisely 9:03 a.m. the next morning. I logged into the estate management platform, a fortress built with 3-factor authentication, rotating codes, and a cold storage backup in a Nevada safety deposit box. My thumbprint confirmed. My retina confirmed. My passphrase, "The name endures," confirmed. I navigated to the beneficiary structure module. There he was. Mason Elliott Caldwell. Status, active. 1 keystroke. Edit. The system prompted, "Update beneficiary status." I selected the drop-down. From active to void, due to voluntary name severance, clause 17.4. A red flag icon appeared next to his name. A warning that couldn't be dismissed. I clicked save. Confirmation dialog. This action cannot be undone. I entered the master override password, the one my attorney made me memorize and never write down. Hit enter. Done. Just like that. Mason ceased to exist inside the legal universe I had built. To the outside world, he was still a high school graduate with 218,000 followers and a pending admission to a state university with a legacy scholarship. But to the family trust, he was a ghost, a name that no longer matched, a non-entity. The surname clause wasn't performative, it was foundational. Every document tied to our estate, from land parcels to corporate voting shares, required active alignment with the Caldwell name. Mason's public renunciation of it, witnessed and documented, had triggered the algorithmic firewall embedded in the trust logic. And unlike people, systems don't forgive. It didn't just stop at inheritance. The cascade spread like a silent infection. The lake property, technically under a holding entity whose bylaws only permit lineage title holders to access or co-sign withdrawals. His permissions? Revoked. The Caldwell family artifacts, including the grandfather's war medals and the first edition law texts passed through 5 generations, marked as ineligible for transfer. The Caldwell Foundation Scholarship, where Mason was next in line for a full ride, flagged and retracted by the trustees. The clause clearly read, reserved for descendants in name and deed. Voting rights in Caldwell Holdings Incorporated. Mason had no idea, but he was set to receive a 3.5% passive voting share on his 21st birthday. Gone. Transferred back to the legacy reserve pool. All automated. All airtight. Somewhere around 10:17 a.m., the system generated a notification. You have successfully updated your estate alignment. Advisory board members will be notified. I exhaled. Not out of relief, out of confirmation. There was no joy in this. I wasn't spiking the football. I was flipping the circuit breaker in a house that no longer needed to stay lit. Mason thought names were about ego. He didn't understand they were infrastructure. At 11:42, I received a message from the Trust's General Counsel. Short, clinical, precise. Per your directive, Clause 17.4 activation has now propagated to all linked structures. Mason Caldwell's renunciation is legally recognized as a surrender of claim. As of this timestamp, he holds no residual beneficiary status. His legal identification mismatch renders him incompatible with all surname lock protocols. No further action required unless reversal protocol is initiated, requires full board vote plus unanimous family council approval. Unanimous. There's no such thing as unanimous when you build a structure on pride and rules. That was the point. I closed the laptop, but the work continued behind the scenes. Automated messages to the estate's external partners began to queue. Accountants, property managers, education liaisons, heritage conservators, all receiving the same quiet update. Mason Caldwell is no longer recognized. By 2 p.m., one of the family historians had already archived his name in the non-aligned descendants section. His picture, once slated for the next printed family tree, was replaced with a placeholder. Entry revoked by waiver clause. I walked outside, stood in the garden, and watched the wind ripple through the hedges I'd planted 20 years ago when Mason was still in diapers. I remembered teaching him how to prune roses, how to tie his shoes, how to open a gate with a latch hidden under the side panel. He'd forgotten every lesson I gave him, but I hadn't forgotten a single safeguard. The estate, the legacy, the entire machinery of memory and wealth. I didn't build it for love. I built it to last. And that meant knowing when to lock the gates, even if it meant locking them behind your own blood. The first post went up at 7:12 p.m. A filtered photo, of course. Mason sitting on the hood of his stepfather's Escalade, one foot planted on the bumper like he'd just won something. Caption, finally dropped that loser's name. Feels good. All caps. 2 fist emojis. 1 crown. The comments rolled in fast, some of his friends from school hyping him up with WS and fire emojis. A few of the girls from his media class chimed in with hearts and "you deserve better anyway." And then, of course, her comment. 3 red hearts. No words. Just approval. I watched it play out from my study, the screen casting a faint glow on my otherwise dark room. I didn't even need to scroll. The algorithm brought it to me. I was still tagged in some of the older family photos, the ones they hadn't yet scrubbed from his timeline. We were still connected, technically, but emotionally, that bridge had been ash for days. 2 hours later came the second post, a staged candid of Mason walking next to his stepfather on a golf course. Identical polos, same short-cropped haircut, matching smug grins like a beer commercial gone sideways. The caption was a masterclass in unearned arrogance. Proud to be taking his last name soon. Respect is earned. Again, the same firestorm of support. But underneath, nestled between the cheering and the emojis, was something else, something colder. A distant cousin wrote, "This the same guy who missed your birthday 3 years in a row?" Another, older relative commented simply, "Wow." No punctuation, just wow. You could sense the discomfort starting to seep in, like water under a door. But Mason didn't notice. Or didn't care. Maybe both. He was too busy bathing in his own declaration. He thought this was the moment he finally stepped out of my shadow. He had no idea he'd just stepped off a cliff. What Mason didn't know, what he couldn't know, is that those very posts were now tagged, archived, and timestamped in the estate's legal server under the heading Voluntary Severance Proof, Social Affirmation. It sounds bureaucratic, I know. But these weren't just digital tantrums. They were legal receipts. The clause we triggered wasn't just paper deep. It required demonstrable public confirmation of name renunciation for the severance to hold airtight under fiduciary audit. And Mason, bless his proud little heart, had given us two in under 24 hours. Voluntary. Public. Celebrated. His stepfather even shared it to his LinkedIn with some drivel about blending families through love and leadership. That was the moment I realized I didn't even resent the guy. He wasn't a threat, just a mirror. One that Mason looked into and mistook for a window. Her third post came at midnight. A black and white image of Mason as a toddler holding my hand, cropped so my face was out of frame. Caption: "Growth is letting go of what was never real." Broken Heart Sparkles. It got over 300 likes. I stared at it, emotionless. Not because it didn't hurt. It did, somewhere beneath the steel, but because it finally explained everything. This wasn't betrayal. This was revelation. I had always suspected that Mason's heart leaned her way. I'd ignored the quiet clues. How he rolled his eyes when I mentioned legacy. How he never asked about the company I was grooming him for. How he once told his friend, loud enough for me to hear, that business suits are for people who peaked at 40. What I was watching now wasn't just rejection. It was confirmation. That everything I feared he might become, he had. And not only had he become it, he was celebrating it. And for me, that was enough. Not to forgive, but to stop doubting. It's funny how people think silence equals defeat. They post louder, brag harder, thinking they're scoring some unseen point. But silence isn't surrender. It's surveillance. I screenshotted everything. Uploaded it to the legal server with hash verification. We had what we needed. Every like, every comment, every hashtag. They weren't memories anymore. They were exhibits. Proof that this wasn't a mistake. It was his decision. His choice. And it was final. The first tremor hit quietly. No explosion. No big announcement. Just a little red warning banner at the top of Mason's college financial aid portal. Your scholarship eligibility has been revoked due to a change in status. Please contact your fund administrator for clarification. That's it. No explanation. No breakdown of figures. Just a system notice that might as well have said good luck. He refreshed the page 3 times. Logged out. Logged back in. Same result. The Caldwell Legacy Grant, the one we'd set up years ago as part of a structured educational fund for bloodline descendants, was gone, like it had never existed. The portal now showed a balance due of $42,800 for the upcoming semester. Mason stared at the screen, then opened a new tab and searched scholarship revocation glitch, as if Google could reverse what he'd signed. He called the university office. Voicemail. He called the financial aid line. Hold music, then nothing. By the 4th attempt, he was pacing the room, checking his Wi-Fi signal like it was the problem, as if bad reception could possibly cause this kind of collapse. Eventually, he called his mother. "It's probably a mistake," she said casually, wine glass clinking in the background. "These portals are a mess this time of year. I'll talk to someone." Mason calmed down, temporarily. Because that's the thing about ignorance. It's a comfort drug. It numbs you, right up until the scalpel cuts too deep. 3 hours later, she got the call. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered on speaker, still half distracted by whatever she was stirring on the stove. "This is Deborah Caldwell." A pause. Then a familiar voice. "Ma'am," came the measured tone of my estate attorney. "I need to speak with you regarding a document your son signed last week." She stiffened. "I'm sorry, who is this again?" "Michael Petros, lead counsel for the Caldwell Estate and Trust. Clause 17.4 was triggered upon signature. I'm calling to ensure you understand what that document entailed." There was a beat. The sound of the burner clicking off. "Clause what?" "Clause 17.4, he repeated. "Voluntary name severance. Under the terms of the family charter, your son's signature voided his eligibility for all benefits, financial or otherwise, administered under the Caldwell name. That includes the Caldwell Legacy Scholarship. Wait, no? That's his college fund. That's locked in. That was already approved. You can't just... Respectfully, he cut in, his voice granite. Your son's voluntary renunciation of the Caldwell surname constitutes legal disassociation from the family line, as outlined in the trust. Clause 17.4 is binding. There is no appeal process for beneficiaries who nullify their own eligibility through voluntary means. I just wanted to extend the courtesy of a direct explanation before the advisory board issues the formal letter. Silence. On the other end of the call, you could almost hear the color draining from her face. You mean you're actually going through with this? It's already done, ma'am. Another silence. Then the call disconnected. She didn't hang up. She dropped the phone. Mason stood nearby, piecing together what he could from her expression alone. The smug confidence he'd worn all week, the strut of a boy finally free from his father's name, began to crack. For the first time since that brunch, I suspect, he felt something stick to the bottom of his stomach. Not just fear. Consequences. They had played the whole thing like a PR stunt, like a symbolic gesture. But the trust wasn't symbolic. It was a machine. And once you pulled the wrong lever, the gears didn't grind. They spun, cold, fast, irreversible. That night, Mason sent an email to the university. Then another. Then 3 more. He called again, this time leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. He even posted in a student forum asking if anyone else had lost their scholarship due to a family name issue. No replies. Not even pity likes. At 2:17 a.m., he sent his first text to me in over 6 months. Hey, can we talk? I didn't reply. Not because I enjoyed the silence, but because it wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to the system he'd voluntarily stepped out of. They showed up just after noon, a mother-son duo trying to mask their urgency as casual concern. Mason sat in the passenger seat of her leased BMW, arms crossed, jaw clenched, scrolling aimlessly on his phone. Deborah drove like she was late for a luncheon she wasn't invited to. Tight grip, short turns, no music. For once, neither of them was narrating their lives on social media. There was nothing performative about what they were about to do. The gate loomed ahead, tall iron bars that once meant safety, now looking more like a verdict. Deborah pressed the call button at the keypad. BZZZT, no response. She tried again. Still nothing. She tapped in the old gate code. The keypad blinked red. Access denied. What the hell, she muttered. Mason leaned forward, watching her type it in again. Slower this time, as if the numbers might respond to politeness. Same red light. She tried a second code, then a third. Each rejection felt louder than the last. Finally, she got out of the car and walked up to the speaker again, pressing and holding the button. Gerald? Her voice was clipped. It's me. Deborah. We need to talk. Nothing. She looked over her shoulder at Mason, who now looked like he wanted to disappear into the seat. I know you're home. This is ridiculous. The gate didn't even buzz. The silence mocked her. Just then, the side gate opened a crack. Not the main one. This was the old service entrance, tucked near the shrubs. An elderly neighbor stepped out, walking a yappy little dog wearing a bandana that said, "Rescue me." "Oh, hi there," Deborah said quickly, her voice switching into social mode like muscle memory. "Is Gerald inside? We can't seem to reach him." The neighbor didn't smile. "He moved." That single sentence knocked the air out of her. "What? He moved?" The woman repeated, securing the dog's leash. "Said he was making some changes. Privacy matters or something like that. Didn't say where." Mason leaned his head out the car window. "Moved? As in moved out?" "Yup." The woman shrugged. "Big moving truck, came last weekend. Quiet crew. Even took down the flagpole. Place has been empty since." Deborah blinked, trying to do the math. "But his whole life is here." The woman looked at her with a kind of polite pity. "Not anymore." Then she walked off. Deborah stared at the house. The hedges were trimmed, the lawn still perfect, the windows freshly washed. But it didn't feel lived in. It felt like a display home, a museum exhibit for a family that no longer existed. Mason got out of the car and approached the front gate, gripping the iron bars with both hands like some teenager in a jail scene. He stared at the house, his house, once. The place where he'd spent holidays and summers and countless arguments over curfews and grades. Where Gerald had taught him how to sand wood in the garage. Where the old dog, Clover, used to bark like hell every time the sprinklers clicked on. Gone. All of it. No mail poking through the door. No boxes left behind. Even the wind chimes had been taken down. He rattled the gate. Nothing moved. He looked back at his mother. "Do you have his new number?" "I have a number," she muttered, scrolling. But he's not answering. Mason tried calling too. Straight to voicemail. He sent another text. Please. Just talk to me. Please. No response. Let's go around the back, Mason said, already walking. Maybe the old gate's unlocked. It wasn't. In fact, it was gone. The back path had been sealed off with a new privacy fence. Thick wood, 10 feet tall, no latch from the outside. It looked expensive and permanent. As they stood there, looking useless, a delivery van pulled into the neighbor's driveway. The driver glanced at them, then at the gate, then back at them again. Whatever he was thinking, he didn't say it. He just walked past like they were invisible. Deborah exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. He's doing this on purpose. Mason didn't respond. Because deep down, he knew better. This wasn't about pettiness. Gerald wasn't that kind of man. He didn't lash out, didn't scream or sabotage. He removed. He stepped back. Silently. Completely. And left no rope to pull on. There was no forwarding address. No assistant to plead with. No loophole to crawl through. Only a closed gate. And a locked legacy. The engagement party was supposed to be a celebration. At least that's how it was pitched. A rooftop venue overlooking the marina, string lights swaying in the breeze, a catered bar humming with polite laughter and expensive wine. People mingled in khaki blazers and summer dresses, talking mergers and weddings and private schools like they all belonged to the same silent club of generational insulation. Mason showed up late, dragging his feet behind his mother like a dog that had caught the scent of something unpleasant but hadn't quite figured out what it was. His shirt was wrinkled. No tie. Sneakers instead of dress shoes. The look of someone who used to be expected but was now merely tolerated. Still, people nodded when they saw him. They were polite. One aunt offered a brittle smile. A cousin waved without making eye contact. Everyone knew. Something had happened. They just didn't know the scope yet. Not until the envelope arrived. It was handed to Mason by a man he didn't recognize. Mid-50s, pressed linen shirt, wearing the badge of external legal rep like a scar across his chest. He didn't say a word, just held it out like it was a bill Mason had forgotten to pay. Mason stared at it, confused. What is this? The man didn't answer. He didn't have to. Deborah tried to intercept it. Wait, who authorized? But the man had already walked away, disappearing into the mingling crowd like fog under a spotlight. Mason opened the envelope, pulled out the contents, and the world just stopped. First, a photocopy of the form, the same one he signed at the brunch. His signature still cocky, still diagonal, now highlighted in red. Second, a neatly typed list, precise, emotionless, like an obituary written by a lawyer. As of date signed. Revoked, Caldwell Legacy Scholarship. Revoked, lineage voting rights in Caldwell Holdings, Inc. Revoked, access to Caldwell family lake property and land titles. Revoked, heir status under the Caldwell family charter. Revoked, named beneficiary status in all Caldwell-held trust entities. Revoked, burial rights in Caldwell family plot, Section B. Each bullet point might as well have been a bullet to the chest. Mason's hands shook as he read it. At the bottom was a note. Handwritten, not typed. Blood matters. But names carry the weight. You gave yours away. No signature. No need for one. Deborah's face went sheet white. She looked like she might collapse. Her eyes darted toward the bar, toward the exit, toward the oldest members of the family seated near the stage, anywhere but at Mason. A hush started to fall over the group. People noticed. Someone asked, "Is that real?" Another whispered, "Did he get cut out?" The groom-to-be, poor bastard, tried to change the subject by toasting his fiancée. Nobody lifted their glasses. Then, without a word, Mason's grandfather, Gerald's father, the original Caldwell patriarch, who rarely spoke but whose presence still had the weight of a courthouse gavel, stood up from his chair. He didn't say a word, didn't look at Mason, just walked across the rooftop, past the crowd, past the lights, and left. No goodbyes, no nod, just a quiet, permanent exit. And in that moment, Mason finally understood the difference between being removed from a party and being removed from a bloodline. He tried to laugh it off. Guess I'm free now, right? But it came out broken. A dry, pathetic cough of a joke that no one even pretended to entertain. People began to shift away. Conversations returned, but none included Mason. He became an exhibit, something to glance at, then forget. Deborah stood next to him, frozen. Her hand hovered at his back, unsure whether to comfort him or protect herself. He stuffed the papers back into the envelope, crumpled the corner, didn't know what to do with it. His name was still his, technically, but not legally, not historically, not where it counted. For the first time, Mason looked around the room and realized he wasn't part of the family anymore. He was just a guest. It didn't happen all at once. That would have been easier to process. One big explosion, one dramatic fallout. But real exile? That's quieter. It's the slow withdrawal of warmth you didn't realize was holding you up. The first thing Mason noticed was the silence. Not on social media. That was still buzzing with recycled photos of him and his stepfather, videos of brunch clapping, all the bravado from before. But real silence. The kind that shows up in notifications that don't come. Aunt Lacey didn't text after the engagement party like she usually did with her rambling voice memos. Uncle David, who had promised to help Mason land a summer internship at his accounting firm, suddenly stopped returning calls. The same cousin who used to tag him in every dumb family versus outsiders meme unfollowed him completely. At first, Mason assumed it was the party. Maybe the delivery of the envelope had just made people uncomfortable. He told himself it would blow over, that it was just the older generation being dramatic, that everyone knew family drama was theater, not law. But then he opened his email. Subject line, Startup Governance Update. From Dylan Caldwell, his second cousin. Hey Mason, hope all is well. After internal review, the board has voted to restructure roles within the fund. As part of that, we've reallocated your observer seat. Appreciate your energy early on, and best of luck with everything moving forward. No phone call. No heads up. Just removed. The startup was small, sure. Just a family seed fund exploring green tech. But Mason had been part of it from the beginning. He helped pick the damn name. He designed the first pitch deck on his laptop senior year. And now, he was just gone. No vote. No voice. No access. He forwarded the email to his mom with the subject line. Can they even do this? She didn't answer for 6 hours. When she finally replied, it was one word. Yes. The same day, his birthday came and went. Not a text. Not a card. The year before, he'd received 17 messages by noon. 2 of them from relatives he didn't even like. This year, just a comment from some high school friends saying, hope it's a good one, King crowned. No one from the Caldwell side even acknowledged it. The real gut punch came at dinner, 3 days later, when his stepfather finally broke the silence. They were eating grilled salmon, one of the few meals Mason still liked at home, and the air had been thick for days. Mason had been pacing, moping, waiting for someone to bring it up. So, he said casually, stabbing at his asparagus, I guess the Caldwells really cut me off. The stepfather didn't look up, just chewed, swallowed. Then, looks like it. That was it. No defense. No support. No plan. Just confirmation. He didn't say we'll fix it, or they'll come around, or even that's harsh. He just nodded, sipped his wine, and kept eating like Mason had asked about the weather. It hit Mason like a slap. Because until that moment, he'd believed, deeply believed, that his stepfather was his backup parachute. That if the Caldwells pushed him out, he'd have a new family system ready to catch him. But he wasn't family to them, either. He was leverage. Optics. A symbol in Instagram photos and family bios. And now that the weight of his Caldwell name had evaporated, so had his utility. Over the next week, Mason tried to rebuild connections. He texted 3 cousins, only one read it. He called his godmother, voicemail. He even tried tagging Gerald in a photo of them from 2016, captioned still proud of everything you taught me. The tag didn't stick. Gerald had either deactivated or blocked him. He looked at his own last name, still Caldwell on paper, but hollow now. Like wearing the badge of a company that no longer exists. You can say you work there, but the key card doesn't open any doors. He finally understood what that note meant. Blood matters. But names carry the weight. No one was angry anymore. No one was yelling. They weren't punishing him. They had simply accepted that he'd chosen to leave. And so they let him. He found me pruning rose bushes. Not metaphorically, literally. I was standing beneath a pergola in the northeast corner of the Ashton Botanical Reserve, wearing gloves and a wide-brimmed hat that had seen better decades, snipping back some overzealous climbers before they overtook the trellis. Volunteer badge clipped to my shirt, sun on my back, clippers in hand. I knew he was there before he spoke. That heavy, uneven footfall. That pause of someone gathering the courage to say something they didn't rehearse enough. Dad? I didn't turn around. Dad, he swallowed. Please. I kept trimming. 1 snip. 2. The silence forced him to fill it. I didn't think it would mean all this. I was just angry. Mom said he stopped. Recalibrated. It was a moment. Just one stupid moment. Now I turned. Slowly. Not dramatically. Just enough to face him fully. He looked older. Not in the lines on his face, but in the way he stood. like someone who'd aged 10 years trying to fix a mess with tools he never learned to use. One stupid moment, I echoed, tilting my head. That's what we're calling it. His eyes dropped. I didn't mean to. You thought it meant nothing. I said, not angry, just clear. That's what you meant. You thought signing away your name was just a social stunt. A rebrand. A little theater for the brunch crowd. He didn't argue. That was new. I thought I could undo it, he said. Or fix it. You can't. I said it plainly, like telling someone they missed the last train and the station's closed. You didn't just break a rule. You tore the contract and the bloodline in the same breath. You said the name meant nothing. And the legacy listened. He stepped forward, just once. I didn't know you'd take it this far. I didn't take anything, I said, shaking my head. You gave it away. I just honored your choice. He flinched like the truth had slapped him. And then, finally, the mask cracked. Do you even care? He said, eyes wet now. Do you care that I'm standing here trying to fix it? I looked at him, really looked. And in that moment, I realized he still hadn't learned. He thought fixing this meant reversing paperwork, apologizing, clicking undo on a keyboard built on generations. I care, I said. But caring doesn't mean rebuilding a bridge you burned while laughing. It means planting something new somewhere else. This soil, I gestured to the trellis behind me, won't take your roots anymore. He stared at the roses. Maybe remembered being a kid in our backyard, cutting them for his mother on birthdays I had to remind him of. I can change it back, he tried again. The name. Legally. I can. It's not about what's on your license, I cut in. It's about what you meant. And what you meant is loud. It's documented. It's viral. And more than that, it was believed. He said nothing, just stood there, his mouth opened slightly like he'd forgotten how to breathe. I turned back to the roses. There's a bench by the koi pond, I said, not facing him anymore. It's got your great-grandmother's name on it. You won't find mine anywhere near it. That's not an accident. A pause. The longest one. He didn't speak. I didn't turn around. Eventually, I heard his footsteps. Not frantic. Not dragging. Just leaving. No screaming. No last-minute plea. Just distance, quiet and complete. I made one final cut on the branch in my hand. A clean one. The kind you don't tape back together. The boardroom hadn't changed in decades. Long oak table. Frosted windows. A Caldwell family crest etched into the glass above the fireplace that hadn't been lit in years. Same old leather chairs, one for each voting member of the estate. 12 in total. Except now, only 11 were filled. Mason's chair sat untouched. Not removed. Not reassigned. Just empty. Like a scar you don't bother covering anymore. No one acknowledged it. No one needed to. The silence around it had become part of the rhythm. When the chairman read the attendance roll, he paused for half a second at Mason's name, skipped it without emotion, and moved on. I sat at the head of the table, calm. Older. Not hardened. Not bitter. Just clean. The kind of clean you only get after fire has taken what it needs and left you alone in the ashes, untouched, and finally still. The meeting moved quickly. Quarterly allocations, asset shifts, foundation partnerships. The usual. Then came new business. We have one final matter before we adjourn, said Marion, our trust director. She adjusted her glasses, though she didn't need them to read. The new scholarship. Gerald, would you care to introduce it? I nodded once. No speech. No preamble. The Caldwell Legacy Grant, I said, will now be replaced with a merit-based scholarship under a new name. The Heritage Endowment for Namesake Descendants. There was a hum of curiosity in the room. I could see the board members lean slightly forward. Eligibility criteria, I continued, are simple. Direct bloodline descendants of the Caldwell family who legally retain the Caldwell name and who have demonstrated personal and professional integrity tied to that identity. I didn't look at anyone directly. I didn't have to. A few members exchanged glances. A couple of quiet nods. One of the oldest cousins, Todd, actually let out the beginning of a slow exhale. That kind of deep breath you only take when a long, unspoken chapter finally ends. Marion raised the official letterhead for the record. All funds formerly allocated to the Caldwell Legacy Grant have been merged into the Heritage Endowment, now held under irrevocable trust. First disbursement scheduled for next academic cycle. Gerald will personally oversee candidate selection. I leaned back in my chair. No one said Mason's name. Not once. But everyone heard it, in its absence. Later, during the reception that always followed the board meetings, I stood by the windows overlooking the private garden. Someone asked, politely, if the new scholarship excluded adopted children. It didn't, I clarified. Blood isn't always born, I said. But the name must be chosen. Kept. Carried. I didn't linger for long. As I left the room, I glanced one final time at the vacant chair. No plaque. No apology. Just a silent record of a decision once made loudly, now echoing in reverse. A few days later, I signed the scholarship charter in my study. The final line read, "For those who understand that a name is not given, it's earned and kept." The document now lives in the Caldwell archives, across from the family tree. And Mason? His name's still there, faintly etched. But next to it, a small mark has been added. An asterisk. It doesn't link to a footnote. It simply means he left.